Welcome, everyone. The 8th in the series of what we have been calling, since we started 5 months ago, Hoodwinked in the Greenwashed Mountains, and with the subheading, Why Vermont Gets Climate Action Wrong. We've had speakers on many of the false solutions, which is probably the more common term people keep hearing about climate action that's happening both globally, locally in Vermont for sure. Vermont is right up there with all the false solutions that are going on from the Conference of the Parties, the COPs, on down. Just wait. Starting from a wrong place, which is to try and create market-based capitalist fixes to what that market-based capitalist system has created. This program actually will focus on renewable energy and why there are also problems as we move to the so-called green economy, which as long as it's sort of fixated within the market-based system, it's not going to create the genuine solutions we need. It's all based, we did a lot of our grounding in this publication, which is called Hoodwinked in the Hothouse, Resist False Solutions to Climate Change. And there's about, I'm looking at the back, the listing of about 20 different North American organizations who are working on, in their own field, on almost all of these areas that we've covered over the course of these past 8 programs that we've done. There's actually more in here, and this is a great tool. It's available for free, and I think an important read for everybody to sort of understand I think I would call a climate justice based grounding in where we can move forward from to be able to create real solutions. And I think that's good. And I want to introduce my co-collab. We had a small team that put this together. And Earl, who is our presenter tonight, is also one of that small crew who actually helped put together all 8 programs. So I welcome Earl Hatley to talk about renewables and how we can get that straightened out.
And so this will all be on film. And if you want to look at it again, you can, but the point is let your friends see this, go to the Bail website, and they can see it online. And that's the point of doing this, is taping it so that everyone across Vermont can watch it and have circles and see all of our past films where we talked about all of these false solutions, and they can see why they're false solutions. And then we can make change at the State House in Montpelier and make sure that we get good solutions. And I'll talk about that as we get to the end of this tonight. Because I do want to talk about what we can do in Vermont. This is Bear, my friend and cohort that helps me with everything. And he's a really good guy. Next slide. So I want to start off by talking about where we are with the climate. And that's really important because I'll go from there into fossil fuels and on, because I just want to recap the problem. And we have a big problem. And so this production gap report for 2023 has just come out. And I'll start with the Antonio Gutierrez, the United Nations Secretary General, in his statement that you find in this report, that governments are literally doubling down on fossil fuels production now. At a time when we're supposed to be transitioning, we're doubling down. And so he's calling it out. And the COP28 needs to send a clear message that fossil fuel age is out of gas. We peaked in 1970 on fossil fuels, but because of fracking, we ramped up, and that technology allowed us to get more oil and gas out of rock that we couldn't get by drilling. So with fracking, we were able to really ramp up. And that's the only reason that we're able to do this, is with fracking. And next slide. And so what we're finding is that right now we're at 1.37. That seems to be the consensus among the scientists that are contributing to the IPCC reports. NOAA and the Goddard Institute are saying we're somewhere between 1.1 and 1.3, and that seems to be the consensus of the global ground level temperature above pre-industrial levels. However, they all agree that in 2024 we're going to reach 1.5 C. That's where we're trying to stay below, but we're going to hit it in 2024. And then we're going to keep hitting it in subsequent years. And it's now predicted by leading climate scientists that we're going to hit 1.7 by 2030. And we'll hit 2 degrees C by 2050 if we don't ramp down quickly. Our emissions are already taking us to those levels. And so we cannot be doubling down on our fossil fuels production and prevent this cascading of fossil fuels emissions and the rise of our temperatures. Next slide. So this is the black line is where we are. And so these other lines are the top 10 hottest years on record. 2016, the very top red bar, is the hottest year ever recorded. And the black line is 2023. And you can see that that black line popping up above 2016 is September 2023, the hottest month ever recorded. And it's continuing to climb. You can see where these other years started out, the levels they started out at, and 2023 is already climbing, where we might start out for 2024, and 2024 is predicted to climb to 1.5 C. This is where we're going. Next slide. And so, well, next slide. So this just explains that graph. And then the Berkeley Earth Institute, which is one of the most predictable gauges of our state of climate on a month-by-month basis going all the way back to 1850 is saying that right now, September, we're at 1.37. Next slide. And so what the UN is saying is that our governments are doubling down on our fossil fuels production. The United States, Norway, Australia are now the top exporters of oil and natural gas. The United States is the top LNG, liquefied natural gas exporter of the world. We're exporting to the UK because of the Ukraine war to get them off of Russia. And there's a company, a Canadian company there in the UK that is taking that LNG and turning it into hydrogen fuel cells and promoting hydrogen as the new green technology for the UK. And advertising all over the UK that hydrogen is better than EV for transportation as well as the rest of their fuel. And it's getting so much play in the UK that those ads are now spilling over into the US, and the Biden administration is putting billions of dollars out of the IRA to that same company to build that out here. And now billions of dollars are going into promoting hydrogen for the US. And these ads are beginning to come out in magazines and newspapers across the country that hydrogen is better than EV for transportation and energy. Next slide. This is one of the reasons that we're seeing that drilling is going up in the U.S. And around the world, more fossil fuels development at the same time that we're supposed to be transitioning. But they're using this false solution of hydrogen as a part of this excuse. And so they're getting the methane from oil drilling and from natural gas, using that to derive hydrogen. The hydrogen is being derived from the natural gas and from the methane from oil refining, and that's where it's coming from. So with all of this, it's just increasing the emissions, and methane emissions are much worse than CO2 emissions. And so because the national governments are in the middle of this hydrogen and fossil fuels production, we're seeing Washington is promoting this, and we're seeing this play out in state houses around the country. And this is why we're seeing this in Vermont. We see these false solutions that are being promoted by the fossil fuels industry, especially the natural gas companies, because this benefits their infrastructure. They're heavily invested into these solutions, and so they're making money from it. So we've gone from denial to delay in terms of making the transition to wind, solar, and battery storage. And this delay is stalling our transition, and therefore the temperature is climbing. And the time that we need in order to do this transition is running way too short. Next slide. And then there's Hydro-Quebec. Hydro-Quebec is building a transmission line through Vermont to Lyme, Vermont, and then across the Connecticut River and down New Hampshire through Massachusetts to New York. And also along with that is this big 550 megawatt gas plant. It's a landfill in Vancouver, Quebec, next to the Wolanak Abenaki reservation to produce methane gas. They call it renewable natural gas, which will go into the mix with Hydro-Quebec in order to increase their ability to produce electricity through this system. So that's Hydro-Quebec, along with creating more dams to do more flooding to increase their capacity. So this is what we can expect from Hydro-Quebec. So that's the update. Great update, right? Our temperature is going up, and at the same time, our country and other democracies are increasing their production of fossil fuels and excusing that with hydrogen and other false solutions. This is what we're fighting. And so now I get to the subject of tonight's talk, which is why solar, wind, and battery storage are not renewable. But I want to start this out by saying I support solar, wind, and battery storage. This is where we need to go. And I'll talk about that as we get toward the end. So I don't want you to think I'm putting this down. What I'm doing is taking the blinders off so that we go into this transition with our eyes open so that we can do this in a just way. And so I'll talk about that. We need to do this with justice for the people that this is built on the backs of. So that's the point here. So wind and solar and battery storage require minerals like lithium, cobalt, copper, nickel, and others for the technology. And these require mining. And right now they're in short supply. And so the Biden administration is being hard pressed by the mining industry to mine, baby, mine, just like they're being hard pressed by the fossil fuels industry to drill, baby, drill. And so that's the pressure from the lobbyists from these two different industries. And they're buying it and spending billions in both directions. That's what we're seeing. With wild abandon, without thought. And that's what needs to be stopped. First of all, we need to get off of fossil fuels. Second of all, just because they know where all the ore is doesn't mean they have to get it all dug up, all of it now. But that's what they want. They want it all now, regardless of whether or not they need it all now. We can use it all now. It's necessary to have it all now, or we will ever be able to use it all. That's the story of fossil fuels. That's becoming the story of this next extractive industry. They know where it is and they want it. Why? Because they can get really rich from it, and their investors can get really rich from it. And so there's no other thought than that. What we do know, and based on industry calculations, is that 10% of our greenhouse gases come from mining. And then if you add transportation, refining, and getting that to the manufacturer, it adds up to 26% of our greenhouse gases just to accommodate wind and solar and getting it to the battery manufacturers. And so it's not renewable. It's a finite substance, and it creates greenhouse gases. And so that's really the story. So you can't really call it renewable. And that's why I'm saying it's not renewable, because it's finite and it does produce greenhouse gases to develop. And the other problem is that depending on what the mineral is, 70 to 97% of these minerals are found on indigenous lands or on our sacred sites in North America and around the globe. So all of this new technology is built on the backs of indigenous peoples. That's the other thing we have to keep in mind. Next slide. And so the point is we can't mine our way out of climate change. So we have to develop a fresh strategy. So like I said, we do need this technology and we do have to get off of fossil fuels to the maximum extent possible. So the question then is, how do we do this in a just way? Next slide. I want to show you quickly what mining is like because I live it and I have lived it. I'm from Oklahoma, in the northeast corner of Oklahoma, where we have the nation's largest and longest lived Superfund site, the Tar Creek Superfund site, 47 square miles of abandoned lead and zinc mines. The very first Superfund site, when the program started in 1983, it was listed with Love Canal. And Love Canal has long since been cleaned up, and it was an upper middle class neighborhood, and now it's an upper class middle class neighborhood today, all cleaned up. They spent all the money, they cleaned it all up. Our site is still a festering sore. And it's one of 4 Superfund sites in the Tri-State Mining District, 2,600 square miles of abandoned lead and zinc mines. And every bit of it drains into this northeastern Oklahoma County and into our drinking water lake. And so the fish are not safe to eat. And the entire county, this northeast county of Oklahoma, is a Superfund site, the entire county. Next slide. And so we have 10 tribes located in that county. And these tribes, we cannot practice our culture because every stream is contaminated. The riparian zones, the floodplains, it's all contaminated. You can't harvest the nuts, the berries, the herbs, even the buckbrush to make baskets. You can't harvest that and bring it home because it'll get lead and cadmium and zinc and arsenic and all of these heavy metals on the floor of the house, and the babies and the kids would be exposed. They can't even harvest it and bring it home to make baskets. It's not safe. And it's been this way since before 1983, when it was declared a Superfund site. And it's still this way today. Next slide. And so this is what it looks like from the air for 40 square miles. Next slide. And when it rains, it puddles up with water, and all of that runs down into the next slide, Tar Creek. And it's orange because of the iron in the water and the heavy metals in the water, and yes, it rusts when it hits the oxygen in the air coming up from the mines, acid mine water, running into our lake, contaminating everything. And so that's mining. Mining companies abandon these sites and they move on and go dig up more. And when EPA tries to get them to help cough up money, and this is just runoff from the tailings piles. This is mine tailings. This isn't dirt. It's all running into the stream. There's no controls to stop that. So that's mining. And the mining companies, they will just declare bankruptcy and not pay to help clean this up and move on. And that's what all the mining companies involved in this did. So they're not helping to clean it up. Taxpayers are what cleans these things up. We do. We pay it. It comes out of Congress, and Congress doesn't want to clean it up. So that's why this is still a festering sore. Jim Inhofe, Senator Snowball, right? He doesn't believe in climate change. That's who's in charge of this. That's why it's like this. Next slide. This is me at Thacker Pass in Nevada, the future site of the world's largest lithium mine for our batteries for EV cars and trucks, and for battery storage for the new solar and wind technology that we're going to transition to. So I went out there. We had a conference out there, and I went out to the site as was brought out there by the Shoshone Paiute tribes, and we had AIM brought us out there, and we had a time out there. We set up a camp, and so I hung out with them out there, and we crashed the site. And next slide. So I climbed way up high on top of a mesa and took some pictures. So this valley, this is Thacker Pass. Everything you see, this is where we were camped, and everything you see and beyond, that's going to be one giant pit dug out, all of it. The world's largest lithium mine. Next slide. And on further, this is one place where they park. That'll be all dug out as it moves around. Next slide. And this is beyond the pass. That'll be all dug out, that whole pass area. So that's lithium for batteries. Next slide. So I'm co-chair of Western Mining Action Network, and half of our network, 400 groups in the network in the U.S. and Canada that are dealing with hard rock mining. Half of our network are tribes and nonprofit tribal groups. So we have a large Indigenous caucus, which I chair, and we're developing a campaign for the right to say no. The UN has said that we have the right to free, prior, and informed consent for mining, but the U.S. doesn't sign on to that treaty. And free, prior, and informed consent means that the mining companies can send a letter or they can call, and if nobody answers, they check the box, well, we tried. That's prior consent, or that's information, and consent means yes, there's no right to say no. We don't have the right to say no on our reservations and what happens there, because the reservations aren't really our land. It's just held by the U.S. For us. This is just held in trust land. That's what it means. Held in trust by the government for us. The government owns it. We don't have the right to say no. There's really no sovereignty when it comes down to it. Next slide. And so now we'll get into what are the solutions to this dilemma. Since the tribes are stuck the way they are, and we need to make this transition, and we support the transition. But how can we do this and reduce the need for mining and stop the rush to mine, and convince the government that they're going whole haphazard in this direction without thought? So let's put some thought to it. Stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, stop this rush to drill. And then in turning to the transition, let's look at conservation. energy use reduction. And let's really focus hard on conservation and energy use reduction. And the folks, I heard one person say yesterday, how about all the people with more than one home? Let's not do that any longer until everybody has one home, right? Well, you see people that have all these homes, that have all these yachts, that have all these buildings with all these businesses, and they're all lit up all the time. A lot of folks are using a lot of energy. 1%, I saw the data, 1% is using 20% of our energy, and 10% are using 40% of the world's energy. Okay, that's just wrong. So that is really where the problem begins, right there, is energy use reduction. Let's even this out. In our group with the Indigenous caucus, we have a lot of Dene people and others in other parts of the country who don't get to use this energy. They drive for 20 miles to get water, and then they go back to hogans that aren't electrified, and there's Peabody coal. They're digging up their coal and sending the energy to Las Vegas and LA and to other cities, and they don't get any of that. So that's an example. Mass transit. So put that money into these areas instead of mining. Let the mining companies do their thing. They're rich. They don't need the subsidies. We learned that lesson with subsidizing fossil fuels, and we're still subsidizing fossil fuels. Why turn around and subsidize the mining companies and then give them fast-track permitting? We don't have to be doing that. So let's put the money into conservation, energy use reduction, and free mass transit for urban and rural folks so that everyone can get around, making smart towns where bicycling and walking are easy for everyone to do. Let's get real. Next slide. And then the circular economy. I've been studying for the past 7 years what's going on in Europe with these things that I'm saying, and also the scientists there that have been looking at this idea of a circular economy, and that is forcing manufacturers to take back the products that they make and recycle and reuse these products rather than trashing everything and throwing it into a landfill and then buying more, which is what typical consumption is now. When it comes to mining and all of these minerals and metals that's needed for solar, wind, and battery storage, we can recycle that. We can get all these electronic components that are just being trashed and thrown away. We can recycle out of that. Batteries can be recycled. And so the EU did a study, and they determined that they could build out this remanufacturing, recycling economy within 15 years. They determined that they could save 25 to 50% of the metals needed for wind, solar, and battery storage. Within 15 years, that industry could start saving that amount of metals, 25 to 50%. With energy use reduction, how much more could be saved? That would be reducing the need for mining that much. So if we can do that, why the rush to mining? Why not the rush to this? But first of all, the rush to conservation and energy use reduction while we're doing this. We need smart strategies. There's no intelligence in the strategies that we're coming out with. The only intelligence is the rush to the bank with our profits. the mining companies' profits and the payments to the politicians that accommodate them for their campaigns. That's what we're seeing instead of this. So we need a paradigm shift if we're going to survive, if our grandchildren are going to have a future. That's what we need. And with this comes good paying, safe union jobs. What's wrong with that? Next slide. I've already covered that. Next slide. So that's our just transition. Not putting it all on the backs of Indigenous peoples, the poor, and the mining communities, but bringing everyone up together by building out a just transition with conservation, energy use reduction, mass transit, smart towns, a paradigm shift in how we move as a society, and at the same time prevent this coming crisis. That's what we need. And I would also add to that a super fund for workers. It could be modeled after the WPA back in the 30s, where we take the displaced oil and gas workers, the mine workers, and we put them to work cleaning up America, cleaning up the oil and gas legacy, cleaning up the mining legacy, giving them good paying jobs, putting people to work, cleaning up all of these sites, cleaning up our streams, cleaning up all of this at the same time. Union jobs. Next slide. Now, what do we do in Vermont? What's our role? And so these are some of the solutions that I think we can focus on here that would work here in Vermont. 30-30, 30% solar, community solar, and we can do thermal energy, community solar, community thermal energy here in Vermont, 30% from the New England grid. That's the goal by 30-30. That's something that we're trying to get in the new res bill that hopefully will, this in the works to come out in this legislative session. Weatherization heat pumps. This is part of a just transition. If we can get the funding for everyone to be able to do this without upfront costs, low income BIPOC folks, middle class folks being able to weatherize and get heat pumps and make this transition to electrification without increasing their electric bills. So getting grants and funding so they can do this without the big upfront costs. This is what we need. And then besides getting down to close to zero emissions, we need to be sinking some of this carbon because we put way too much into the atmosphere, and we do this with our forests. And so we need old growth forests. We need to stop cutting our forests. And we need to support regenerative organic agriculture, because these two things is the best way that I've seen yet in all of my research to sink carbon. And this is how we do it, is with our forests and with our agriculture, our regenerative agriculture. So we need to be promoting this in a big way. We need to preserve our natural spaces. We need to preserve our forests, and we need to get our agriculture going in this direction. And again, mass transit, urban and rural. And stop the false solutions, and stop buying and selling energy credits to greenwash and hoodwink our people into thinking that we have green energy. There. And so I think that's the last slide, right? Yeah, that's the last slide. So that's it. That's what we do. That's my take. And I appreciate you all hearing me out. And Hoodwinked in the greenhouse. Get that. Don't buy it. Ask for it. They'll send it to you. It's free. You can have as many as you want. Just go to the URL at the back of that book and ask for it. All of these false solutions are in there. It's a good take, but they also have the links to all the research so that you can do a deep dive if you really want to do a deep dive and really learn what's wrong with these false solutions. And now you know why wind, solar, and battery storage is not renewable, but you also know why we need it. But let's do it in a just way. Believe me. Thank you.